Hi there, I'm glad to have you joining me on this second video of our module. Earlier we covered some basic concepts, and on this video we are now ready to start to look at important biological macromolecules. And there are going to be 4 of these that we will look at this chapter. And you might remember these from our earlier video where I mentioned these just briefly. So the 4 macromolecules that we will be discussing are going to be carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and amino acids. And we will start with carbohydrates. So what kind of sources of carbohydrates can you think in a diet? Yes, often we think of things like bread, potato, pasta, rice, corn, sugar, and starches. All that good stuff. Things that we are told to consume in moderation, right? Especially if we are on a low-carb diet, I'd say. But I think that we can do better than that. So often we get stuck to thinking of those things that I just mentioned, but there are also other better dietary sources of carbohydrates that I can think of. Say, lots of vegetables and fiber too. So what are carbohydrates being used for? Carbohydrates are used in our body for 2 important roles. Firstly, to fuel our body processes. So these are a source of energy that we use. And that's why carbs taste so good to us. If you think about it evolutionary, we need to eat stuff that was going to give us lots of energy to survive. So we were built to enjoy foods that contain lots of energy. The second role is that carbohydrates provide us also raw materials for building body structures and so on. So carbs are a really important part of the diet. I do at this stage also want to talk about one more point. Remember how I mentioned that carbohydrates, especially those from vegetables, provide a lot of good fiber. So what is the role of fiber in our diet? We know that it is a non-digestible portion of the diet, so it really just passes through our digestive system. We do not get anything like energy or nutrients out of it. So why do we still need to make sure that we have enough fiber in our diet? Well, the explanation is in other beneficial characteristics of fiber. First of all, it works as a bulk in our diet, giving us a feeling of being full. So by having fiber in our diet, our stomach and other parts of the digestive tract are actually full, so they are stretched like there is enough food in there, and we feel less hungry. The second reason is that this bulk also helps to move materials along the digestive tract. It gives us something for the digestive tract to push against, to scrape the stuff up from the walls and make sure that we also clean the alimentary tract in this way. So make sure that there is enough fiber in your diet. There are a few terms that we need to know when we talk about carbohydrates as macromolecules. Let's have a look at those. So we can talk about monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. The term at the beginning is the most important here for us. Monosaccharides are single sugar molecules, such as glucose, which we can see a simplified structure drawn here. Other examples would be fructose and dextrose. So these are the simplest form of sugar and generally considered as a poor dietary source of carbohydrates. This is because they are quickly processed by the body because of their simple form, and any energy that we might get from them is quickly burned away. So these would give us a quick spike of blood sugar. but then they result in the blood sugar crashing again after they have been consumed. So these are not ideal for us. Let's have a look at the disaccharides. They are formed from two monosaccharides that have been joined together by dehydration synthesis reaction. Remember, we discussed about these in our first video of this module. Examples of disaccharides include sucrose, which is our simple table sugar, lactose in milk, and maltose. You might remember that maltose was responsible for fermentation in production of alcohol, for example. These are a little better than monosaccharides, but still not ideal source of energy by a long shot. This is once again because they are so easily accessible for the body that the body ends up burning them off really fast. So they give again this sugar spike, and then this is followed by a crash in blood sugar. The last group that I have listed here is polysaccharides. These are long chains of sugar molecules. Some examples that I can think of would be starch in case of plants and glucogen in animals. These two are the forms of storing energy. And we can also have cellulose. This is found in plant walls. And the last one that I came up here is as an example is chitin. This is one that I want to mention a few more words about, just quickly. So the reason for this, as we see in one of our later labs, is that chitin forms the exoskeleton of many arthropods. So you know what an exoskeleton is, do you? So rather than having an internal skeleton like we humans do, many insects have their hard external skeleton outside the body. This exoskeleton supports and protects these insects. And one example of this is going to be the Madagascar hissing cockroaches that we will use in one of our labs. Interestingly enough, this is the structure that many insect sprays attack. One way how many of my students remember exoskeletons is by thinking of them as similar to the medieval suits of armors. But let's get back to this listing briefly. So if we consider what we have seen so far, we will note that we prefer complex saccharides rather than the simple ones. This is because when we consume these complex polysaccharides, our body has to go through more steps to digest them. In this way, they remain in the body for a longer time and can be made available when the body needs carbohydrates. So really, polysaccharides are the way to go. So that's all I wanted to say about carbohydrates. Let's look at the lipids. When I ask for dietary sources of them, this is usually along the way of the answers that I did. But again, I think that we can do better than this. So some examples of dietary sources of lipids include butter, oil, cheese, ice cream, lard, fats in general, and cholesterol. Notice that we do need some cholesterol for hormone production, but your body does all of that you need. There is no need to get it from food. So what are lipids used for? Well, lipids provide a highly concentrated long-term energy storage. So an excellent source of energy. That is why, evolutionarily, these are again so good tasting for us. Our body is hardwired to feel reward of consuming these, as having this energy-rich food was a wonderful gift for our ancestors when the food was scarce back in the day. A few more things to note. Firstly, lipids are insoluble in water, and certain oils can serve a protective function too, for example, forming a layer on top of the skin. This layer would keep away bacteria and other pathogens and also contribute to this barrier between what is kept inside and of course what is kept outside. Same for fur of many aquatic animals. Lipids in their fur protect them from the elements. And same goes for many plants with wax coating on their leaves. There is one important concept that we will look at next. That's triglycerides. These are a main constituent of, for example, body fat in humans and animals and vegetable fat too. Let's look at if we can make more sense out of their chemical structure. So we see that these are made out of one glycerol group, so that's where the word glycerid comes from, and 3 fatty acid chains that have joined it. So that is of course where the tri comes from. And if we want to combine some of the other things that we have learned about this, they can be broken apart in the process of hydrolysis or put back together by dehydration synthesis. And next, I would like for us to talk a little about different kinds of fatty acids. These can be divided into 2 types, saturated and unsaturated. Let's have a look at them both. Well, saturated fatty acids are typically solid in room temperature. You can think of butter, for example. Many animal fats are examples of these. The key thing here is that these have only single bonds in their structure. And if you think about butter and other animal fats, these are generally not as good for your health. In fact, they are typically associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Let's look at unsaturated fats. Well, these are usually liquid in room temperatures, so examples of these are oils, and they are plant origin, so they are considered generally a healthier option. What we see here, what is important, is that there is at least one or more double bond in the structure of these. And this double bond has a significant consequence. It causes this kink in their structure. And now I would like to discuss just briefly about trans fats. I am sure that you have heard about them, but what do they mean really? Well, trans fats are these imitations of butter spread. They are made of fats that are normally liquid, but then have been solidified with the use of chemistry. And on a chemical level, this is what happens. There are 2 hydrogens, but these are both on the different sides of this double bond. Notice how in unsaturated fats, which we just looked at, they were on the same side. So let's think of these a little more. They are these things that have been advertised as at least a great buttery taste, and I can't believe it's not butter. Well, neither can I. I cannot believe that you are doing this. So what's the harm? I mean, we take fats that are naturally in a liquid state and just make them appear as if they are solid. We know, after all, that these liquid fats are better for us. And we also know that the solid fats taste better. So aren't we really making a huge favor here by making these available? And that was exactly the idea behind developing these products, that we would be offering healthier options that still tasted good. You can often hear these being referred as hydrogenated fats. Well, we know that these trans fats or hydrogenated fats, they are cheaper, very convenient, soft-spreading so-called butter, and they taste good, or at least better than oils. So the idea behind this was a good one, and no doubt from good intentions. However, It turns out that the body cannot process these artificial fats in the same way as the natural fats. And they have been linked with especially an increased risk of what we now know as bad cholesterol. This is associated with a greater risk of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes. And for anyone who has debated if they should use margarine or butter, here is an interesting process graph of the manufacturing process of these products. See how during the manufacturing process heavy metals are used and bleach and so on. In the name of fairness, I do have to say that everyone has an agenda. This might be fairly biased graph. So next I want to talk shortly about phospholipids. And let's start with a question, where might you have heard us talk about phospholipids? Well, if you have studied cell biology at all, this is of course the cell membrane that is made of this phospholipid bilayer. And if you are not familiar with that, don't worry, we will get to it soon in our course. So let's have a look at the structure of a single phospholipid. A phospholipid has two ends. The polar head end is known as being hydrophilic. This means that they like water. They are water soluble. The non-polar tails instead are hydrophobic. What do you do if you have a phobia of something? You try to get away from it. So these aim to avoid water. They are not water soluble. And that's why this phospholipid bilayer that we see at the upper right corner spontaneously arranges this way, with tails in the middle and heads to the outer sides of it. But this all is stuff that we will talk more about when we look at the cell membranes. For now, I would like you to be able to identify the head and tails of a phospholipid and know that the heads are hydrophilic while the tails are hydrophobic and what these terms mean. The final concept regarding lipids that I want to talk about is the steroids. These are characterized by a structure of 4 rings that are fused in a specific configuration. These really have only very slight differences from one steroid to another. And they have 2 main functions in the body. And I have also mentioned some examples of steroids here, cholesterol and sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. Out of these, I want to mention a few words about cholesterol. And we have seen this picture already earlier before. So we need some cholesterol in the body. It is used to make hormones, vitamin D, and various digestive substances. But your body makes all that you need of it. You don't need to get it from diet. Any dietary extra cholesterol builds up on the arteries and can lead issues, as in this figure. Let's talk about proteins. So typical dietary sources of it are meat, milk, beans, nuts, eggs, tofu, and fish, to mention few. One thing to note regarding protein is that your body doesn't really store protein in a format that it would be available to be used for metabolism at the later stage. That's why, for example, you might see at the gyms people who are taking during or after workout protein drinks and so on. So they want to ensure that there is that dietary protein available for building muscles when this building muscles happens. Because as I said, the dietary protein isn't stored in the body waiting for a later time when it is needed. What happens also is that if there is not energy sources like carbohydrates, lipids, or proteins available in the body, and one still exercises or otherwise has a lifestyle where energy is needed, what happens then is that your body may start to burn your own muscles off, converting them to energy. So what I think of when I think of these are, for example, when sometimes in the gym you see these skinny people who have no extra mass in their body and who probably aren't eating that much, but they still keep exercising like crazy. Well, they won't be building up any more muscle mass because any muscle that they would build, well, the materials for building those would need to be taken from other muscles that already exist. So proteins are used for many things in the body. We have structural protein, which contributes to the building of different parts. And also we can use protein for our metabolic processes. Later on this course, we will talk a fair bit about transport proteins, which control and facilitate the passage of ions across the membranes, for example. Defense system and regulation functions also utilize proteins. And then we have, of course, movement generating muscles that proteins contribute to significantly, our skeletal muscles. So what I have mentioned here is that proteins are polymers of amino acids. Let's have a look at that a little more. What does that mean? Well, we have an amine group, NH2, and then we have also carbonic acid group, so COOH. And of course, we have this side chain, which is symbolized by an R. These vary greatly as we see in a second, but this is the general structure of an amino acid. And there are 20 different amino acids which are commonly found in proteins. Each of them have different side group, which we marked with R in our previous diagram, and on this table shown as written out. The differences in the side groups determine the differences in the chemical nature of these proteins. In the past, when I was teaching this chapter, the textbook that we were using had this picture. And students kept asking me, what is the deal with Nicole Kidman here? Why is her picture here? And what does she have to do with proteins? Well, this may reveal that it was quite an old textbook, but back then, Nicole Kidman was like the biggest star in Hollywood, and she had just taken a perm. And your hair is made of protein. So, when you treat a protein chemically, changing its chemical structure, that will also change its shape or function. So that's why her perm had to do all with the proteins. I think that it is a rather random fact, but it would make a great exam or homework question, just saying. Let's jump back to talking about proteins and how they are made out of amino acid chains. And this is one curiosity of this that I like to mention. We will look much more into this later in your studies when we talk about the blood in your anatomy and physiology courses, but I will just mention it here. So what we see here is red blood cells. They usually appear like these round flattened discs with an indentation in the middle. This shape is described as biconcave discs. Well, sometimes we may have an error in the DNA that codes for these red blood cells, and this error is just that of a single base, so a very, very small amount of off from what the normal gene for the red blood cell is. But this minor error is enough to have large consequences. So these red blood cells that are of a strange shape, they look like these half-moon shaped structures or crescents. They are known as sickle cells. they are essentially wrong-shaped red blood cells. And because of their wrong shape, they are not able to carry as much oxygen, and an individual may become anemic. We talk about sickle cell anemia. All because of a single base of a difference in the DNA, which results in a single amino acid difference in the proteins. How about that? I wanted to quickly jump back to this slide, which you have seen before. And let's focus on these first three biological macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. And the order in which I have listed these is not an accident. In fact, the order that these are in, first carbohydrates, then lipids, and finally proteins, this order is also the order in which the body prefers to use these macromolecules acquired from the diet. If available, your body will first use carbs. If there's not carbs, then it goes for fats. So this is what the no carbs diets are based on. If we do not have carbs in the diet, then we have to start burning the fats. And finally, if we have no carbs and no fats, then we go for proteins. So remember my earlier example of an individual who had next to nothing on their body and still kept exercising. If we have none of the three of these, we will then start to use our muscles as an energy resource to keep us going. Okay, we have one more group to talk about here. Let's look at the nucleic acids. We will talk about these much more later in this course, but for now I want to just have a general review of these. So where do we see nucleic acids? Yes, in the DNA and RNA. As a side note, it was only probably about 3 years ago when I realized that the letters Na in both of these stood for the nucleic acid. My mind was blown. So what are DNA and RNA used for? Well, they store the genetic information and are used as template for making proteins. Let's look at the structure of a nucleic acid. So what we see here is a single nucleotide. Let's go through the different parts that make up. So we have a sugar, which you can see here, and then we have a phosphate group at this end. Because of these two, DNA is sometimes said to have a sugar phosphate backbone. And finally, we have a nitrogen containing base, which has been highlighted here with this bright green. And in these bases are what varies in the DNA. Remember the backbone, so sugar and phosphate, they remain the same. But these bases can be either adenine, guanine, cytosine, or thymine. And in the case of RNA, we have adenine, guanine, cytosine, and uracil. The final thing that I want to say regarding this is that the DNA is packed as a double helix, so it is two strands that wrap around each other, while RNA would be a single strand. So that completes our review of the biological macromolecules. Make sure that you know these, as they are the very basic ones that we use when studying the life. And that also completes our lecture videos for this module. I will see you next week.